Hello, N4H&H here with the Yaesu FTdx10. You're looking at my external monitor because I want you to be able to see this area here better. The audio frequency FFT. This is like a spectrum scope for the audio frequency range, both on receive and transmit. So that is 1 kilohertz, 2 kilohertz, 3 kilohertz, 4 kilohertz. And, so if you're watching that while somebody's talking, you can see how wide they are. You can see even what range of frequencies their voice is transmitting at. So, in other words, you can kind of see how wide their transmit bandpass filter is set. So 1 kilohertz, 2, 3, and 4. As a general rule, with sideband, it's been an agreement for decades. We don't usually want to transmit beyond 3 kilohertz. That way we can have a QSO. For example, I'm on 7150 with this radio right now. So I could have a QSO at 7150 and somebody else could have a QSO at 7153, and we would, pretty much be able to do that without interfering with one another. So we generally don't want to go beyond this 3 kilohertz range with our voice, okay? And so we set that in the menu under radio setting, TX BPF select, transmit bandpass filter select. Now I've got it set on 300 to 2700 hertz. What I'm saying is, hey radio, I want you to start rolling my voice off at 300 hertz and 2700 hertz. I want to focus my voice range between 300 and 2700. And if you want to understand why I said it that way, go back and watch my video entitled Power Spectral Density. Power Spectral Density. But it has to do with intelligibility, watts per hertz. Okay, I'll just give you a couple of little tidbits there. So in other words, if you do the math on that, I'm transmitting at 2.4 kilohertz bandwidth, but I'm starting at 300 and ending at 2700. Now, like many filters, it's not a brick wall. There'll be a little bit of a slope down below 300. It'll still affect, it'll just begin to gradually slope off. And then above 2700, it'll gradually begin to slope off. Generally goes all the way up to about 3K. So that's why this is a nice place to land, in my opinion. So that's transmit bandpass filter. So I'm going to click back, and I'm in a dummy load right now, so we're not going out over the air, but I'm going to transmit my voice, and I want you to watch the scope here, and you'll even be able to see it slope off up here down to 3K and slope off down to about 50 hertz somewhere along in here from 300. So in other words, even though the bandpass filter is set 300 to 2700, it's not exactly cutting me off at 300 and 2700. So let me do that and let you see that. Hello, see that? See, you can see that there are 3 peaks, by the way. Hello. A low peak, a mid peak, and a high peak, but you see it's pretty much cutting off at right around 3K, maybe a little bit above 3, but it's very low there, very low amplitude. Hello. So setting at 300 to 2700 is still going to give you, a range of up to about 3K, but also down to about 50. Hello, 1, 2, 1, 2. Hello. Now, that's not what this video is about. But that is what I wanted you to understand how to interpret that scope first, in case you didn't already know. But what this video is about is some misinformation that is out there that even fooled me because I trusted the source. The Yaesu manual is very vague, and so we're going to get into that. One of my viewers, Tobias, did some experimentation with his FTdx1000, and he discovered that the bandwidth setting for your equalizers has been misinterpreted. Now, I'm not talking about transmit bandpass, okay? We're going to get into equalization here. I've shot some videos in the past about transmit audio EQ, and those videos are still valid as far as the settings I give you, but the interpretation of the bandwidth part is incorrect because we've been given incorrect information. I only found one website that would interpret this, and it's a major microphone manufacturer, and it seems that they got it wrong. So thank you, Tobias, for your testing, and I'm going to pass this along to the viewers here on the channel. We're talking about transmit EQ, but again, I wanted you to understand how to interpret this display right here, transmit audio bandwidth. The reason you see 3 peaks, hello, and by the way, there's a peak down around 300 hertz, and then one around 1500, 1300, 1500, and then one around 2400. Watch it. Hello. Now, those are the lows, mids, and highs. Now I'm going to get into the menu. And even though transmit bandpass filter is set under radio setting, right here, the EQs are under operation setting. And here they are. Now be careful about this. Parametric EQ1, right? You'll see parametric EQ 1, 2, and 3. They each have a center frequency, the level, and dB, plus 10 down to negative 20. And then the bandwidth, that's what we're going to be focusing on. And that is a 1 to 10. Technically, there's a 0, which apparently turns it off. But then you'll notice as I work my way down the menu, all of a sudden we see P parametric EQ1. That's for when you're running the processor. So let me just throw this out to make sure, because boy, this can cause a lot of problems too. If you do not have the processor engaged, these EQ settings make no difference. By the same token, if you do have the processor engaged, these EQ settings make no difference. So what Yaesu has done is they've given you the opportunity to have 2 different EQs, transmit EQ settings, one for when you're not running the processor, one for when you are. And if you think about that, what that can do for you is you can have, like, when you turn the processor on, you can narrow everything up, narrow it down, if you will, to where you've got more of that DX type audio, thin audio, punch to a pilot. And then when you want to rag chew, just turn your processor off. So it's kind of nice that they did that for us so that you can have 2 different parametric EQ settings, one for rag chew, one for, DX chasing. I tend to run mine the same all the time, processor enabled. So I'm going to move down to the P parametric area, and you'll see that my first EQ is centered up at 300 hertz. You get to choose that frequency. And then it's boosting at 10 dB, and the bandwidth is at 2. All right, and then I've got another EQ at 1300 hertz. And for those of you who use a Heil microphone, I find that 900 hertz works better for a Heil microphone for the mids. For example, a PR40 or PR781. I'm using a Yaesu MD100 right now, and with the Yaesu mics, their hand mics or the desk mic, 1300 hertz seems to be the area that you get the best result from. So I'm centered up at 1300 hertz, boosting by 10 dB, bandwidth 2, 2400 hertz for the high EQ, the EQ3 for the highs. 2400 hertz is the center point, boosting by 10, bandwidth 1. Okay, now I've covered all that in a previous video. What I want to focus on now is bandwidth. This is where that scope is going to be able to prove this out. And thank you for Tobias for prompting me to look into this, because again, we've been given some misinformation. The Yaesu manual is vague about what that means. It just says bandwidth 1 to 10. Now it's got a graphic in the manual that shows, Q. It says the letter Q. Well, that really is what this is. It's a little bit confusing because you would think bandwidth 1 means a narrow bandwidth, and bandwidth 10 would be a wide bandwidth. In other words, you're centered at 2400 hertz, but you're affecting a wider range of frequencies, plus or minus 2400 hertz. That's not the case. This really should say Q. Q is a measure of a filter's, we'll say how narrow it is or how wide it is. So quality of the filter, think of it that way, Q, quality. Well, that's a matter of perspective, really, isn't it? But a higher Q means narrow filter. In other words, at 10, I'm affecting 2400 hertz mostly, and a little bit plus or minus. Whereas at 1, I'm affecting 2400 hertz and a broad range of frequencies plus or minus. It's still a slope, but it's less of a slope. So think of it that way. So with the bandwidth set at 10, my slope is going to be very steep. With the bandwidth set at 1, the slope is going to be very gradual. So even though I'm centered up at 2400 hertz, I'm affecting a broader range of frequencies. So in other words, I can overlap a little bit with my mids setting if I'm set on 1. See, 1300 hertz, boosted at 10, bandwidth 2. That one's set pretty broad as well. If you think about it, I mean, it's also default at 1. By that would even be more broad. I bumped it up a little bit. I wanted to, I just found that it sounded better there. So you got to remember those numbers, the lower that number means the wider range of frequencies it's going to affect. So a setting of 1 here with the highs at 2400 hertz will slope off so gradually that it can overlap with that middle EQ that's at 1300. So I hope that's making sense to you. I'm going to show you on the scope now. I'm going to back out and watch the scope, and you'll see the lows, the mids, and the highs. Hello. All right, you see? Now, I want to go into the menu, and I'm going to change the bandwidth here, which again is really Q. I wish it had a parentheses, Q, close parentheses, because that's really what you're doing. Bandwidth 1 means wide bandwidth, bandwidth 10, narrow bandwidth. Now I'm going to change that now to 10 and let you watch the scope. Hello. Now you may be noticing that now the highs are peaking a little higher than the mids. Hello. Because that filter is now more focused on the 2400 hertz range, and so it's not overlapping down there with the mids. Now I'm going to do something real drastic here to illustrate this even better. Instead of boosting my highs, I'm going to cut my highs by 20 dB, negative 20. All right, now watch. Hello. Lost my highs, didn't I? Hello. But the mids are still there, you see? Hello. But now watch what happens. Going to go back into operation setting, and I'm going to widen this bandwidth. In other words, low Q, low quality is the way I think of it. I just figure, like on CW, you pay for a 300 hertz crystal roofing filter. You pay more for the 300 than you do for the 500 because you want a more narrow band pass, right? And that's sort of like Q. Now, so I'm going to cut at negative 20. Now watch what happens to the mids. Hello, even the mids are lower. Hello, because of that overlap. I cut at negative 20 and I used a low Q. Hello. That would sound awful over the air, by the way. It'd be all lows. It'd be muddy. So let me go back in and narrow that again. Higher Q. Still cutting, but I'm cutting the highs, and the mids now should come back more. Hello. You see the mids are back because I'm now focused more on 2400 hertz. Let me illustrate this a little bit as far as Q. I'm going to go over to side CW mode, and I'm going to enable the APF filter. So APF, audio peak filter, that is a very high Q filter in the audio spectrum, and what it's doing is, you can see it's even in plus or minus 10 hertz increments. What the APF is, audio peak filter, is it is focused on whatever frequency you have your CW pitch set to. That's your side tone. And it's going to boost it with a very, very high Q, meaning a very narrow filter. And so now the reason it's adjustable is in case somebody's a little bit off frequency. Although I tend to leave it on 0, and if they're a little bit off frequency, I'll adjust the VFO to find them. You can't do that on 60 meters though, because frequencies are programmed into the radio to protect us from getting in trouble with the government, because we share 60 meters with the government. So you can't change the VFO setting on 60 meter channels. So APF is definitely the way to adjust up or down in case somebody's off frequency. That's what you're doing with that. But again, it's such a tight filter, such a high Q, that it is adjustable in 10 hertz increments. So just using that as an opportunity to show you what we mean by Q. In fact, look at the illustration. Pan up a little bit. I covered this in a previous video. See that illustration there for bandwidth? Well, watch what happens if I broaden that out. Right? That's low Q, that's high Q. 50 hertz, the highest Q you can go with the width filter. All right, with the width setting. See, that's low Q, high Q. All right, now back into our discussion. Going back into the menu, operation setting. So right now at 10, I'm at a high Q, meaning very narrow. And since I was cutting, the frequency range centered up at 2400 hertz, by 20 dB, it's really knocking 2400 hertz out. But since I had my Q set high, it wasn't extending down into the mids frequencies down here around the 1300 hertz range. See? So now watch what would happen if I were to narrow the bandwidth here, go to a higher Q for the 1300 range. Got to get back to sideband mode. Hello. Hello. Look at the gaps, the valleys, I should say, in between the peaks. Hello. Now remember, my 2400 is not there right now. I've knocked it way down. Hello. You see my low is the highest peak. Hello. But there's the mids, and then there's valleys in between. Hello. Those valleys will be deeper if you're running high Q. Now let me put that back where I normally run it. Now watch the mids. Hello. See that valley between the lows and mids is a little less deep. Hello. Because I've lowered the Q. I'm allowing the 1300 hertz EQ to extend down toward the 300 hertz EQ, and it's filling in that gap a little bit. Hello. You see? Now, I'm going to go back in and set the 2400 hertz back to a boost, and I normally boost that by 8 to 10. I'll go ahead to 10. Much faster to do that with the knob. All right, then the mouse. All right, there we go. So now high Q though. See high Q, which is narrow bandwidth. Hello. See my highs are back. Hello. Now notice that the highs are peaking just a little bit more than the mids. Hello. So now watch what happens if I go in and I lower the Q there. You see the highs and the mids are about equal. Hello. And that's because with a lower Q, wider bandwidth, the 2400 hertz boost is also extending down toward the 1300 hertz, filling in that valley between the two a little bit, but also boosting 1300 a little bit. So look at that again. Hello. Hello. So here's what I want you to get as a takeaway from this. With a low Q, in other words, one is a wide bandwidth, low Q, that 2400 hertz is reaching down about an octave. If you're a musician out there, you know what I mean by octave. If 2400 hertz is my center frequency, an octave up would be 4800 hertz, and an octave down would be 1200 hertz. And so at 10, at 1, the bandwidth is about an octave wide. So it's extending down there and affecting 1300 hertz. Now that part is correct on the website where they explained, I'm not going to give the name, but they were referring to it as affecting octaves. Well, that is true, but it's backwards of how they interpreted it. And again, thank you, Tobias, for your experimentation to point this out. The 1 means that it's the lowest Q, and it seems that 1 is going to extend down plus and minus an octave. So at 1, I would also be affecting 4800 hertz, were it not for, and here we're going to loop back, were it not for this setting here. TX bandpass filter, transmit bandpass filter select. See, I told it to start sloping off at 2700 hertz. So even if I were, even if it is set at 1, it's not going to do anything with 4800 hertz because the bandpass filter's starting to slope it off at 2700. I hope that is making sense, and it's a good opportunity to show you how this scope can be useful. You can watch people while you're receiving them and see how wide they are. You can see where their peaks are as far as lows and highs. You hear people out there that sound like a bullfrog, well, you're going to see a big peak down in this area and not too much up in here, and that's bad. So there again, here we go. Hello, and that's how I run mine. Hello, that 1300 hertz and that 2400 hertz boost. Hello, help one another out with the low Q, and makes my voice more intelligible. That's great for breaking through pileups. It's great for when you're maybe, band conditions can be such that you're weak to someone else. Not your fault. You could be running 1500 watts and be right down at the noise floor because of conditions, right? Band conditions. But making your voice more intelligible by boosting the mids and the highs will help people still understand what you're saying. So these people that are out there, transmitting this broad bandwidth, wide bandwidth, and a lot of lows to try to sound like a broadcaster, that's okay if you're just rag chewing. But if you're chasing DX, or trying to just have a QSO with somebody and band conditions aren't great, that's going to work against you. Okay, I hope that made sense. Thank you, Tobias, for prompting me to get into that in more detail. Fortunately, the FTdx10 has a built-in scope that allows us to look at the audio spectrum and analyze these sort of things, so that's great. And hey, Patreons, thank you so much for helping me keep this channel going. Could not and would not do this without you. It just takes too much time, and your monthly donations help motivate me to do this. So thank you so much. If anyone else out there would like to become a Patreon supporter of this channel so we can continue to bring this type of content, please do go to www.patreon.com/N4HNH. That's www.patreon.com/N4HNH, and I'll put that on the screen. And of course, if you would, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. That helps us as well. And if you do subscribe, click the bell and you'll be notified when I upload the next video. Okay, I hope you found the video helpful and informative. And thanks for watching. And this is N4HNH saying 73.